A very warm welcome to a new episode of IDFC First Bank Presents Leaders of Tomorrow Season 11. I'm Ritwika Gupta, and tonight a very special conversation is lined up with entrepreneur, author and content creator Ankur Warikoo. We discuss his journey from a founder to a content creator and author, and also some of his biggest learnings as an entrepreneur. Let's dive in. Hi Ankur, thank you so much for joining us today on the show. It's a pleasure having you. I wish we were doing this in person, but nonetheless, looking forward to a great conversation.
Thank you so much for having me, Ritwika. I wish we were doing this in person, but this is good enough.
Well, absolutely. So let me start off with my first question, Ankur. Serial entrepreneur, best-selling author, online educator, and a content creator. Among these diverse roles, which one do you presently identify with the most and why?
If I had to pick, it would be entrepreneur. I wouldn't even call it serial entrepreneur, just entrepreneur, because I believe that entrepreneurship is not a profession, it's a state of mind. And I remember for the longest time, I've had the mind of an entrepreneur, whether I was running a company or not, whether I was in a job or not, or whether I was thinking about what to do next or not. There is something that sets the entrepreneur's mind distinctly different from one that isn't. But if you really ask me, outside of these, a teacher is what I would call myself. I love teaching, I love helping, I love mentoring, I love guiding. And I think in the multiple roles that I've played in my life, whether as a founder, whether as a professional, even today as either a husband or a son or a father or whatnot, I'd like to play the role of a teacher because that's something that comes naturally to me and it's something that gives me a lot of fulfillment and a lot of contentment.
That's wonderful. So what does entrepreneurship mean to you, Ankur? Is it just about creating a business or is it about generating profits or is it about influencing, having an impact? How would you define it?
As I said, entrepreneurship to me is not a profession. While it can be, and it is a really heartening profession and a one that gives a lot of joy to people who eventually go about doing it. But not everyone is meant to be an entrepreneur, but everyone can become one if they think of entrepreneurship as a state of mind. You can be in a job and still be an entrepreneur by the way that you think about things. So let me ask you a question. Is Sundar Pichai an entrepreneur or not? Is Satya Nadella an entrepreneur or not? And I'd argue that they are better than most entrepreneurs out there, but they don't own the company that they run. They didn't start that company. They don't own sizable share or stock in that company. And yet, the reason I would call them an entrepreneur, or perhaps they would call themselves one, is because they think like one on a daily basis.
I absolutely agree. It is indeed about the mindset. So on that note, tell us, what are some of the valuable lessons that you have learned as an entrepreneur over the years?
Oh, I could go on and on. How much time do we have? There is so much that I've learned in the past 14 years, Ritwika, being an entrepreneur and a founder and a leader and a CEO. The biggest lesson that I've learned is that the market is the market. This has been perhaps the strongest and the most hard-hitting one. And what I mean by that is, when you start your own business, it doesn't matter which college you've gone to. It doesn't matter how much you scored in that. It doesn't matter how much experience you've had before that. It doesn't matter how much funding you've raised. It doesn't matter how hard or easy you had it. It doesn't matter how much salary you're drawing. It doesn't matter what your valuation is. What matters is, do customers love your product or not? And that's it. None of us buy a product from a company because the founders are from IIT, or because they raised so much of money, or because they scored high in their college, or because they did something XYZ. We buy it because we love the product. The market is the market. And this is a hard-hitting realization for most people because they're used to life happening to them because of what they've done in the past. And entrepreneurship is the most brutal form of showing you the mirror and saying, you know what? Everything that you've done so far, great. It should help you in making this product for us useful. If not, you're not worth anything. That's the first lesson. Number two, people make the journey easier. Entrepreneurship is a really hard journey. It's a very lonely journey. And as much as of revenue or profit or valuation or press or media and everything you will garner, none of that is really going to make it easier for you to navigate through the hard times than the people you work with. So picking up the right people, building the right culture in the organization, recognizing that you want to work with people who vibe with you and share the same value system as you is just so critical to the entire journey that most people think it isn't as important. And that's why I believe they go through a lot more stress and a lot more hardships than they necessarily need to. And number 3, the lesson that I learned is that you cannot lie to yourself. At some point of time as a founder, you may recognize that your presence in the company is not going to materially alter the outcome of the company. In fact, it could be possible that you are a hindrance to the success of the company in terms of its future. Recognizing this is a very important trait.
So now let's talk about your latest book. It attempts to give answers to 36 life questions. Tell us what inspired this idea. How did you zero in on these specific 36 how-tos, and how will it help a reader in their journey through life, work, and more?
So writing this book has been a fascinating experience. Number one, I started with a lot more questions, and these questions frankly come from people every day. I didn't have to work hard. Every single day I get emails and messages, and so many people are asking me questions, and there is a pattern to those questions. They're frequently asked, some more than the other. And I just made a list. I believe we started with a list of 57, and we started with that list. We started fleshing it out. Then we eventually narrowed it down to 36 because the book shouldn't have been so heavy. And what I am most excited about, and I was most proud of, is we wrote it in a student-teacher conversational manner, which is reflective of what the Socrates and Plato discussion was back in those days. And as recently as a few years back, Courage to be Disliked, which is a book that went on to become a global bestseller, also had the philosopher and the student's interaction as part of a conversation. I feel conversations make it easy because the question that the student is asking could be the question that you have in your mind, and if you suddenly were to encounter that question, you feel like you're resonating with that content and it's flowing in the direction that would help you. And that's why it was such a joy to write this book in the manner that we did.
Ankur, in your book you mentioned something interesting. You spoke about how people need to find their passion not only in terms of personal fulfillment but also in terms of generating financial rewards. So do you think there can be an intersection of some sort? In other words, what does it take to translate passion into profession?
That is a great question. And I think the most important question for most, because they're struggling to make sense of how their passion can find a place in their life, because somehow, somewhere down the line, they convince themselves that their passion cannot become a profession, or it's virtually impossible to do so. And I'd argue it's possible, but one needs to be very practical. So number one, don't be a fool and quit your job to follow your passion. That's really poor advice. And if someone's giving you that advice, that person does not want you to win. Because financial stability is a thing. It's a practical thing. And you cannot just suddenly say no to all the responsibilities you have financially towards your bills, maybe your family, maybe even yourself. And that's why I would say stick in your job. Stay in your job. It pays for the bills, and that's a thing. It's an important thing. But while you're in your job, and for whatever reason you may not be liking it, but it doesn't emotionally and physically harm you. So you're just in that job, but you know that your heart is not in it, but you're happy that money comes through every month. Then just do what is required for you to do a disciplined job in it. You don't have to strive for becoming the employee of the month, or performer of the year, or the star employee and all of that. You don't have to aim for growth. You just have to aim for stability. Get that stability. And then whatever time is left out of your job, your nights, your weekends, your holidays, whatever time you can, spend it on exploring what your passion could be. It could be something you already identify. It could be painting, could be singing, could be content creation, could be journaling, could be counseling, could be teaching, could be dancing, could be anything. But you use that extra time to hone your skill, not with the intent of making money from it. Because if you were to put the pressure of making money on your passion from day one, your passion is going to die. So you make it devoid of any financial implication. I'm doing it for the joy of it, and I'll just see where it goes. And when you do that for a year, for 2 years, you will begin to see patterns that emerge that help you unlock capital from your passion. It will be slow and steady, and perhaps even trivial in the beginning. But the more you do it, the more you recognize that you're getting better at it. It actually allows you to make money. And at some point of time, your passion income will replace your real income. At that point of time, you're free. Quit your job, make your passion your profession, and be patient with it. That's the only way that it's worked, and I would recommend to everyone.
It's time for a quick break here. We'll be back in just a moment. Stay tuned.
I am so bullish on India, it's not funny. I think that the next 20, 30 years for this country is going to be unprecedented in a positive way. Not just for the country, but it's standing globally in terms of innovation, technology, progress, and just the sheer audacity with which we approach things.
Welcome back. You're watching IDFC First Bank Presents Leaders of Tomorrow Season 11. And tonight I'm chatting with Ankur Warikoo about entrepreneurship, leadership and more. Take a look. Now, you've also openly spoken about your failures and mistakes. What advice would you offer to aspiring entrepreneurs and professionals who are in the initial stages, of their career and are apprehensive about failure? How can they cultivate a growth mindset? What advice would you have regarding striking a balance between risks and rewards of entrepreneurship?
In India, unfortunately, we have either of these two approaches towards failure. Approach number one is don't ever fail. Do whatever you can, but don't fail. Because failure is for losers. Failure is for people who should not be part of us. We are bigger than that. We never fail. We strive to never fail. Approach number two is if you do fail, move on. Move on very quickly. कुछ नहीं होता, आगे बढ़ो. बड़े-बड़े देशों में छोटी-छोटी बातें होती रहती हैं. You just move. And either of these two approaches is wrong towards failure. One, because you cannot prevent failure. Everyone in this world will fail one day. It's inevitable. And you can't run away from failure in the sense of if it failed, you just move on very quickly to the next one and the next one and the next one. You haven't had even time to process that failure. So my only suggestion is that don't run away from failure, because failure is the surest and simplest way for you to learn something new. But that will only happen if you actually pause after the failure to reflect upon it. If you don't sit with your failure will just become another failure and another and another and another. So the wisest people that I have met, the ones with most judgment, the ones that have learned the most from life, are not the ones that have succeeded the most, are not also the ones that have failed the most. They're the ones that have learned the most whenever they failed.
Sure. And as an entrepreneur with over 14 years of experience and extensive involvement in the startup ecosystem, how would you describe the present startup scenario in India? In your perspective, what have been the biggest transformations?
I am so bullish on India, it's not funny. I think that the next 20, 30 years for this country is going to be unprecedented in a positive way. Not just for the country, but it's standing globally in terms of innovation, technology, progress, and just the sheer audacity with which we approach things. If you were to ask me what are the fundamental things that have shifted, one is of course just the sheer reach of the internet to almost every Indian out there. Less than 3 years back, we had about 30% of the population online. We today have about 60% of the population online. And it's only going to go in one direction. That's unbelievably rich and access that is democratized to everyone. Number two, our demographic dividend. We are an extremely young country, and I think we'll begin to see the yield of that in the next 10, 20, 30 years, where the average age is less than 27. 300 million people are going to join the workforce from school and college, a movement that has never happened before in global history in the next decade. And with that, I believe the biggest shift that is happening is this sense of courage, audacity, matched with the acceptance of who they are. It's not about, oh, I have to know English to win in life. It's not about, oh, I have to be in a tier 1 city to win in life. It's not about, oh, I have to come from a top college to win in life. It's about, I need to dream big. I have already the infrastructure that any other person comparable in a big city or with the experience educationally would have. And now it's up to me to make this happen.
So on Leaders of Tomorrow, we also talk about money and wealth on the show. Could you share 2 to 3 investment tips that every entrepreneur in India must consider in 2023?
I would have 3, true to my Instagram, 3. Number 1, please take care of your personal expenses and your personal financial well-being. Just because you're a founder, while you're responsible for the financial well-being of your company, you're also equally responsible, if not more, towards your own personal financial well-being. So keep yourself covered. Have a health insurance, have a life insurance, have an emergency fund, pay yourself well in a salary, and make sure that that base is covered. That's number 1. Number 2 is that as a founder, please make sure that you have multiple income streams built out. Whether it's through investing your personal money somewhere, whether it's investing in startups, whether it's having a side gig, whether it is anything else, while you focus 100% of your attention in building your startup, please don't ignore the fact that this cannot be 100% of your outcome. And number 3, please, when you think of building your company, be very, very prudent and responsible financially. Use it as if it's your money, even if it's investors' money, even if it's equity. Use it as if it's your money.
Ankur, tell us, what's your take on leadership? How do you think the definition of leadership has evolved over the years?
Leadership is a fascinating concept for me. I speak about this a lot, and the biggest thing that I would say is, particularly in the startup context, there is this one word that is often used, and that is scale. How does this thing scale? How does this thing scale? And scale is getting more done with lesser resources. And I'd argue that everything in a startup should scale except leadership. And what I mean by that is, by definition, it should become harder for you to lead the bigger you are. If it's becoming easier for you to lead the bigger you are, there's something wrong. Because leadership is about people, and people are not data points on an Excel sheet. People are people. And as a leader, you ought to play a game that is highly personalized. This for me is the singular definition of leadership. Are you leading people the way they want to be led, as against are you leading people the way you want to lead?
Finally, before I let you go, tell us what's the focus for this year? Are you planning to author another book?
My focus this year is very simple. Keep doing what I have been doing all these years. I'm a very boring person by that nature. I'm a person of routine. I don't get bored doing the same thing over and over again. I can eat the same food again every single day. I can wear the same clothes every single day. I can do the same thing every single day. And that means that I marry myself into a process. The process does mean that the book will come out every single year. It's not just this year. Every year, as long as I love writing books, on December 17th, there will be a book from our brand. And that's a promise. That also means that every week, there will be these number of videos that will go on all these platforms. There will be a podcast, there will be a newsletter, there will be this, there will be that. All of that is clinically part of a process. Where it takes me, no idea. And I don't think about that. There are no goals, there are no targets. It's just a process. It's just habits that eventually compound to take me to places that I frankly could not have imagined for myself, and we certainly as a team could not have imagined for ourselves. But here we are, and that gives us even more confidence that if without goals, without targets, in less than 3 years we've reached this spot, then if we continue doing this, then maybe in the next 3 to 5 years we'll be far bigger than we imagine ourselves to be.
Well, on that note, thank you so much for joining us on ET Now. It was so much fun chatting with you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. It was a joy. Thank you for all the thoughtful questions. They made me think, and I hope that the answers did justice to the questions. All the best.
With that, it's a wrap on this episode of IDFC First Bank Presents Leaders of Tomorrow Season 11. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. Thank you and goodbye.